All right, when it's time to trim, you're going to want to get your clay to the leather hard stage. You're going to want to get your wheel set up, and you're going to need some extra clay, as well as your trimming tools. And your trimming tools are generally, they come in the kit. Your large loop tool, your small or skinnier loop tool, or sometimes called a ribbon tool, and your needle tool. Some people also like to have a rib handy for doing some smoothing. And then, of course, you're going to want your maker's mark so you can stamp this. So how do you know when the clay is leather hard? Well, it's fairly stiff, but it hasn't really started to change color yet. It's soft enough that you can make maybe a fingernail mark or something like that. You can move the clay, you can cut the clay, but you're not going to really squish it. You're not leaving fingerprints on the surface. And that just means it's stable enough to stay up, not squish, not change shape while you're cutting some of that clay away. If it's starting to change color, getting lighter in color, if it's getting really dry so that the only way to chip away is to kind of grind at it, then it is too dry and you're done. You cannot trim it at that point, in part because it's much more fragile, much more easy to break, but also because if you trim it at that stage, you'll know it's making kind of a whistling sound as you're trimming it. It's kicking off little tiny bits of clay. What you're doing is you're kicking up clay dust at that point. Clay dust is silica. The reason we always clean well in the studio is to prevent silica from kicking up in the air, and we don't want that silica dust out in the studio because we breathe it in and it can make us have cancer, give us silicosis. So if you look, and so the other piece of this is why do you trim? So if you look at this bowl here, it's the shape inside looks okay, the shape on the top looks okay. It looks kind of rough, heavy, ugly down at the bottom. It also, these little edges that come up, those will be sharp later on. Right now they're soft and I can squish them into place, but if I let them dry and fire them, they're going to be sharp. They're going to potentially scratch up the table, scratch up even your hand when you're working with it. So what we are trying to do is to get that outside curve on the outside and the bottom to match the inside curve that we've thrown. So this should be taken care of already. Most of this top part should be taken care of already. And what we're going to do is trim out clay in the middle, clay on the outside to create that nice curve. And the foot acts almost like a piece added onto the surface after it's been made. It's not, it's carved into place, but that's what it's meant to look like. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get this clay centered on the wheel head. Now I've put a bat on here just so it shows up a little bit better on the camera, and that is literally the only reason. You don't need to trim on a bat, but I've put it on here, and that means I don't have any lines to use, so I'm just guessing here that I'm centered. I'm going to use my needle tool to check if I really am centered. So I'm going to start my wheel spinning. I'm going to hold my needle tool parallel to the wheel head or the bat, and I'm going to hold it with two hands braced against my body so that it will draw me a line on this clay. And notice that I've let it revolve 2 or 3 times, 4 times there, and it made the same mark every time. What you want to not do is just, drag your finger there. I've made a line, but it doesn't tell me anything. It doesn't tell me about how centered this is. And just as an exaggeration of the process, I've pulled this way off center. We all know that it's too far over this way. And now you can really see my line gets drawn on one side. That line, when I stop the wheel and look at that line tells me the clay is farther over to this side where the line is. I'm going to push it away from that side, wipe away that line, and do it again. And you can see I still have some wobble. So I'm going to redraw that line. The line drew from here to here. I'm going to push it away from that side. Notice I'm drawing my line not right at the top of the foot, the very bottom of the piece that's at the top right now because the piece is upside down. I'm not drawing that line up there because that section's fairly rough. It's not fully round itself. And so this section where I am drawing the line gives me a better sense of the real shape of the bowl I've got here. So I have gotten it so that it's drawing really a pretty faint line, and sometimes what happens at this point is you find that your bowl isn't quite round. If it's making a mark on this side and this side, across from each other, then that's a pretty good sign that it's just not quite round. You can try to push it back into round, Or you can just say, you know, close enough. If you do not get your piece perfectly centered, but it's very close, you can still go ahead and trim that foot. It'll be a little off center. It'll make your pot look like it's leaning a bit, but it's okay to do. Once you've got your piece centered or as close as you can get it, you're going to take some wads of wet clay, hold this guy down, and you're going to push those wads into place. And I'm pushing these wads of clay against the clay and against the bat or the wheel head. I don't want these wads to be real sticky or real rough on the edge, or else they're going to leave bits of themselves on the clay. It's on the bowl. If my bowl is leather hard and not too sticky, if my wads are not too sticky, when I'm all done with this, I'll just pull them off and you won't really be able to see that they've been there. So I've got my piece centered. Obviously it's fairly rough. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the large loop tool to get rid of some of this extra clay at the top. So I'm going to hold this needle tool. I recommend holding it in both hands, two hands, nice and braced against your body. And I'm going to hold it about 3 o'clock, maybe 2 o'clock on the wheel head, over here. Up here I don't have much control. Back here it's a kind of funny angle. Over here I'm pushing the clay. Over here at 3 o'clock the clay is coming into the blade of this loop tool, and you can see that when I start to cut this away, it's cutting off in these nice long ribbons. If I pick up these ribbons, they kind of stick back together a little bit, and that's a good sign that you've got the right wetness of clay. So I'm just going to clean up a bit of that edge. I'm also going to flip this and work on the top, again working at about 3 o'clock on the wheel head from the middle to the outside. And here I'm just getting rid of any unevenness. Maybe when I cut it off it was a little wobbly or a little uneven. Maybe my wire tool that I cut it off with was a little wobbly. So I'm just cleaning that up. Once I've cleaned that up, I'm going to mark where I want my foot ring to be. Now I've got this much foot to work with. I don't want my foot ring way out here because it's just going to look heavy. I don't want my foot ring way in here because it's not going to be very stable. So somewhere in between those two extremes. I usually think of this as moving about 1/3 of the way out on the side of the pot. And I'm going to draw a line with my needle tool. I draw the line just by bringing my needle tool down at about 3 o'clock on the wheel head, holding it steady and letting it do a full revolution. What the lines I've got here show me the inside and the outside that are going to get cut away, as well as showing me the ring of foot that's going to stay put, that's going to stay there. And so I'm going to cut away clay on the outside and the inside. I'm going to try not to cut into that center section at all. When you are starting out, I'd recommend maybe leaving that line a little thicker, a little wider, as if you're going to make more of a foot. And the reason for that is in case you accidentally cut through it. Alright, so I'm going to start with my large loop tool, and I'm going to cut away clay up to that line, up to that outside line that I've drawn, and going down into the side of the bowl. Now before I put this bowl on the wheel, I paid attention to what kind of shape I had on the inside. If I have a really steep interior bowl, that means that my walls are very thick. I've got a lot to cut away in the middle, not as much to cut away in the very center. If I've got a very wide bottom, then I don't have as much to cut away here. And so I've got to be aware of that. Mine's pretty round, and so I have a pretty good sense of how much I can cut away. Also, I've cut a lot of bowls, and so my bowls tend to be fairly similar, and so this one's going to look like the other ones for me. So this large loop tool allows me to get a bunch of clay away off of the pot or off of the bowl fairly quickly, and but it doesn't give me as much fine control. So when I want to get finer control, I'm going to switch to this other smaller loop tool. I like to use the corner, the right angle of this thing, rather than the rounded side, and that's really personal preference. You can use either side you want. Again, the clay is going to come into the blade here, and notice that I've got this the flat edge of this loop tool perpendicular to the wheel head at this point. People sometimes have trouble when they're starting to throw. They forget, they try to hold it steady the whole time and just go up and down this way. Remember that your wrist turns, and you can turn this trimming tool to different angles. You can also bring it around in a gradual transition to make that wall match the curve. One thing that people often forget to do is they spend a lot of time looking down at the top of this piece from above. Make sure you get your eyes over here to the side so that you can see that curve. The camera angle that I've got right now is this 3/4 angle, and so you can kind of see both of them at the same time. You can see if I'm starting to make a curve here. Beginners have a tendency to leave a bit of a corner right here. They have it kind of come out and down, and it looks like a perfect circle from above. But then when they finally take it off the wheel, then they look at it from the side and realize, oh man, it's not very round. So if you can't see this side from where you're sitting, get up, walk away before you take the wads off. Make sure that you can see that angle. Now I'm going to switch and work on the inside. So I'm going to actually use the corner of this loop tool. And the corner allows me to get a little bit more clay away more quickly than if I use the flat edge. After I've used the corner to get some of this clay away, I'm going to come back through and I can use the flat edge to smooth things out. Now the depth here and here should match, right? Because I'm trying to create a nice curve, and that curve of the outside should act as if it's continuing from one edge to the other. So I'm going to get in there and take a little bit more clay away here in the middle. The only time I really veer away from this 3 o'clock on the wheel head is when I cut away I've refined the angle on the inside there. And the reason for switching up to 1 o'clock here is just what's comfortable. I can have my loop tool steady and controlled up there. I have to bend kind of funny to get at it over here. Now you also notice, or you may notice, that I've got little ridges happening up here. These are going to be sharp later on. So I'm going to get my needle tool at a 45-degree angle, my loop tool at a 45-degree angle, and cut some of that clay away. All right, so it's nice and smooth. It won't scratch up the table. Get my eyes down here. Make sure I've got as nice a curve as I want it to be, as deep as I want it to be. And these trimming lines that I'm leaving, you can choose to leave those or add on to those if you want to, or you can choose to make them go away entirely. Clean that up a bit, clean this up a bit. Now, sometimes people also like to use rib. I'm going to use a rib here on the bottom of this piece here to just kind of clean it up a little bit, make sure it's nice and smooth. You can use that rib, metal or plastic or rubber on the sides as well if you want to. Now, you are welcome to cut some bowls apart, cut them in half, and make sure that your curve is nice. That's a good learning technique. If you cut a few bowls apart, you don't get to keep the bowls, but you do get to see whether you're on the right track. I am going to simply pull this one off of here, pick it up, and I'm going to get my fingers down there and feel that. I can feel that the thickness here is the same as the thickness here. I can't quite reach the bottom, but I can use my eyes, practiced viewing, and make sure that things are in good shape. Now this piece here is basically ready. One of the things that sometimes happens is you get a little bit of wobble. Maybe you pick it up and it warps a little bit. Maybe your trimming wasn't quite flat, and so you can press it down on a flat surface, or you can even take and kind of rock it around or give it a little tap. All of those things help make sure that that bottom edge is nice and smooth and won't be sharp later on. Now one last thing we want to do is add a maker's mark. So I've got my stamp here, and I'm going to press that in. I'm going to use my finger against the inside so that when I press this stamp mark into there, when I press this stamp mark into there, it doesn't squish the inside wall. And so now you can see that the stamp, it is marked and stamped, and now that piece is ready to dry out and get put in the kiln.